Please welcome Stewart Title's Sales Director, Mick Goodenough. As you know, sales professionals must keep learning. The Sales Professor is in. Here's Sales Minutes with Mick.
And as always, we are so excited when the Sales Professor is here because he talks about sales tips that apply to real estate, the title business, realtors, and anybody that's in sales, which is everybody. Professor, welcome to the show.
That's great to be here, Bill. Thanks for having me again.
And as always, I never know what you're going to bring forth, which makes it extra exciting. So I will start like we always do. What do you have for us today?
Yeah, it's always a mixed bag with me. Sometimes we talk about the motivations behind selling, and sometimes we talk about specific actual sales techniques. And today is a little more along the lines of the latter. And it's the importance of managing a presentation in sales. As most people know in sales, there's a standard or a basic framework of making a sale, and it's finding leads, qualifying leads, probing and questioning to make sure that what they may need is what you may have to offer, presenting that to them, and then closing the sale, asking for the business. And that's a process that can last anywhere from one call to many, many weeks or months, depending on your industry. So the biggest part, though, for me is when you're face-to-face in front of somebody and you're giving them a presentation that really is going to talk to them about the solutions you offer. And you have to do that effectively.
Very interesting. Two components that you pass by there are listening is so important, listening and then asking the right questions. Right there, both of those are nuggets of gold if done properly. Those are tools that can be so useful if we learn to hone those skills. Tell us a little bit about listening.
Well, listening is dramatically important, and in many cases, most people, in my career I found this, most people do not practice what we call active listening. Active listening is listening to understand as opposed to listening to respond or reply. And I've fallen into that. Many people do. Everybody does at some point.
No doubt.
You're listening to someone, but you're thinking about what you want to say to them, and you may be missing some key things in what they're saying that you could follow up on. And so that's where the technique, I call it mirroring or repeating back, is when somebody says something to you, your response can be something along the lines of, so what I hear you saying is X, is that correct? And when you do that, the theory goes, and in the practice as well, is they start to believe that you deeply understand what they talked about, and all you really did is repeat back to them what they said was important, so you know there's a connection there. So active listening is really important. But I heard a phrase once that what makes great questioning, or if you're a great questioner, is that you listen to the answers, because you cannot follow up and ask more questions unless you know which way the conversation's going.
No doubt about it. And just the term active listening makes you stop and listen a little bit harder because we've given it a label that says what it does. That's very important.
Well, it certainly is, and I know you practice that on the show. You listen to what your guests say, and then you ask follow-up questions, and that's a really important thing. It puts people at ease, actually. It makes them that there's a connection. They know there's a connection now. They know you are actually listening, and you're not just trying to sell. Selling is so much about listening and offering a solution that works well for both parties. I always say that the best outcome of a sales call is a mutually beneficial outcome. It's good for the person buying, and it's good for the person selling.
Very nice. And I'll tell you, that is so important. And when we talk about, as you mentioned, being on the show here, it's very difficult to do the active listening, believe it or not, because many times as I am listening to what you say or any guest says, I respond. But interestingly enough, and this is all a learning experience, when I hear the show after the fact, several times actually, when I hear it, it's like, wow, I didn't hear that before. And that's what happens when we hear something over and over. That's why I think repetition is so important in learning. But anyway, that's what I experience when I do this. So there's always something else there that you may not have heard if you were listening a little bit better.
It's true, and I can tell you, as we all know, it's so easy to get distracted, even for just a moment. And it's even a bigger issue now with everybody carries around their cell phones in their hands all the time. They're constantly checking that. So if you're in a meaningful conversation, and certainly in a presentation, that's something you never want to do, because it just it forms this disconnect. And really all this is about is this whole process of the sales process is about managing and growing trust so that someone will make a decision with their money and put what they believe the solution is in your hands as the person selling. And so that's where the presentation becomes so important.
And you brought up a great point. In fact, that now that we have these devices, these principles were important 100, 200 years ago in a transaction. no doubt about it. But today, that extra distraction of these phones, it really takes a discipline and a conscious effort to stay away from that and stay tuned in to the good old-fashioned one-on-one, eyeball to eyeball, and listening and responding properly.
You couldn't be more correct. And in fact, you actually now, I believe, stand out when you do not reach for your phone during a conversation, or obviously during a presentation. That shouldn't be even part of the thought process. But when you are focusing in on them, even if, and I've been in some presentations where they're reaching for their phone, and by the way, that's probably not a good sign. But the point is you're still engaged, and engagement is what we want to talk about, because if you're not engaged, then you're going to miss something, they're going to miss something, and the decision that should have been made for the benefit of both will not be made.
And when you say the word engagement, Mick, I'm picturing gears meshing together to get something done. It really is that. And the engagement, I don't know about cars or transmissions, but there's a part where you're not in gear, but when it goes into gear, those gears mesh together and smoothly go to the desired goal.
That's exactly right. And the gears, that's a great metaphor, because gears actually serve to propel things forward more effectively and efficiently. There's a whole reason for the invention, and we could go down that cul-de-sac too, because I love that kind of stuff. But the biggest thing about presentations is, first of all, where people end up failing in a presentation is they did not prepare well enough. They did not ask enough questions prior to the presentation to get to the nitty-gritty about what that prospect or customer really wants. They did not put their presentation together in a way that is beneficial for the audience. And then here's the biggest thing, and I think this is true of most salespeople, is they did not practice their presentation. And I'm talking about practicing it multiple times, running through it as if you're giving it, doing it in front of a mirror, anything, so that you can know that you are not going to you won't stumble. They'll ask a question, they'll put everybody back on their heels, but you're ready to go. You have it all figured out ahead of time, because ultimately the presentation should answer all questions that they probably have based on your expertise in the market or in the trade that you're in. You should answer these questions ahead of time, knowing they'll probably ask them, and have them in your presentation. That's a really important fact with presentations.
No doubt about it. And I'm going to tell you something that really has helped me when you're talking about practicing it. I use an iPhone. I have 2 iPhones. I look at them too much. But in the meantime, those iPhones, let me tell you, and I know on other phones you can get a program called Quick Record, I think Quick Record Pro. That's the one I use. And I'm going to tell you, the recording quality is exceptional. And what I do when I give any presentation, whether it's 3 minutes, whether on the radio, of course I hear it, 3 minutes, 1 minute, a 10-minute presentation, I just hit that record button and I go about my presentation, and then I listen to it. That is invaluable, because I hear things that, wow, I shouldn't have said that, or I should have said this, or I go down the checklist and say, hey, I did cover this, that, and the other thing. So recording what we do when we have a presentation, even for one-on-one things, I highly recommend. It has served me very well.
And it should, and it's a great point, Bill. It's funny when I ask people why they don't practice or why they don't record themselves or they practice from the mirror, they say, well, I'm uncomfortable. I make a funny face, or I notice I do this. Well, that's the exact reason why you want to practice. You want to, this. And so either you can mitigate it or you can leverage it. I mean, in some aspects,
Absolutely.
gesturing and facial expressions are incredibly important to what you're saying. It put people at ease. But if you're doing things that make people uncomfortable, then you're never going to advance the sale. So you need to see those things.
There's no doubt about it. The same devices that distract us can serve us in a major way. It's just the discernment to know the difference. Mick, with the last minute, what else should we know?
Well, the important thing is to utilize a technique that I call tagging. I learned this from Daryl Turner, one of my mentors. I've spoken about him many times. And tagging is, as you're going through the presentation, you have to stop and say phrases such as, does that make sense to you? Are you with me? Do you understand what I'm saying? Or do you have any questions? You want to stop and you take the temperature of the call, because people are going to have questions along the way, and you can't just bulldoze your way through the presentation and go, yay, I'm done with my last slide. You have to be very thoughtful, and you also have to look at how they answer it. Body language is important. If people's arms are crossed, we know that's they're not open to the idea. They have some issues. If they're leaning forward, that means they're interested. But how they answer the questions to those tagging questions. Does that make sense? How are we doing so far? Are you with me? Is there any other questions you might have? Those are really important things to do throughout a presentation.
Very important. Taking the temperature as you go along. Very important information. Mick, tell people how they can learn more.
Well, you can just email me at mgoodenough, MGOODENO, at stewart.com, and as always, be happy to respond to any questions I get.
Very nice. Ladies and gentlemen, our sales director, Mick Goodenough. Thank you, Mick, for being on the show.
Thanks, Bill.